Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're immersing ourselves in something a bit different, not an academic paper, but a piece of art. It's the album Nam Mi Nam 50 Years. And the sources, well, they describe it as this full cinematic post-rock look at Vietnam and America, 50 years after the fall of Saigon.
Yeah, it's really positioned as a meditation almost.
Our mission today is pretty clear. We want to use this album, this artistic lens, to pull out the key insights. Insights into how personal memory, generational memory bumps up against public history, and, crucially, how music might actually work as a tool for healing. You know, bridging that gap between two nations still dealing with the past.
And what's really striking, I think, is that the project doesn't pretend to have all the answers.
Right.
Instead, it zeroes in on this one really sharp question: what's still here and what's fundamentally different now? And the album is structured around 5 core themes, almost like a map for navigating this half-century of history. We're talking trauma, modernization, the whole lot.
It's a really useful structure. And before we even start looking at that map, we should probably begin with a sentiment that really frames this whole discussion. It's from Phan Thi Kim Phuc, the survivor, from that terrible, iconic napalm photograph. The source material quotes her saying something incredibly powerful.
Oh, yes, I remember reading that.
She said, "I came through the fire, and I am so blessed to be with you today. My dream is that one day all people will live without fear, in real peace, with no fighting and no hostility."
Wow. To have that hope after going through that, it's profound.
It really is. And that hope, born from such devastation, feels like the right place to start this deep dive. Okay, so let's unpack the first big theme: memory and intergenerational trauma. The sources are quite specific here. Memory isn't just nostalgia.
No, not at all. It's defined as a living force.
A living force, and maybe even more tellingly, a record of wounds.
That distinction is so important because the sources really push us past just thinking about history as dates and events. They stress that trauma. Well, it doesn't just get passed down through the big war stories people tell. It's often much quieter, much more subtle.
Absolutely.
It travels in what they call the textures of daily life.
Yeah.
So think about really specific sensory things, like the exact smell of rice cooking in a certain way, or the rhythm of sounds in a city early in the morning, or even just the physical weight of an old photo kept in a wooden box.
That image, trauma carried in a box, not a history book.
Yeah.
That's really something. So does this sort of quiet transmission blur those easy lines, like victim and victor?
Absolutely. It suggests this shared burden, maybe, a shared experience of survival that official histories just can't capture.
Okay.
And the sources talk about how families, especially in Vietnam, actively resist being erased from history. They turn memory into ceremony.
Ceremony, like rituals.
Yeah, exactly. Ritual speech, particular lullabies sung over generations, even specific family recipes. These aren't just domestic habits. They're described as ways of carrying history, asserting presence, pushing back against being forgotten.
So it's memory as performance, almost.
Huh.
A way to keep the past alive and present. But that leads right into the really tough part. The album tackles intergenerational trauma. What happens when you get further away in time?
That's the core tension, isn't it? Grandchildren don't inherit the full story, the whole history. They get fragments.
Right. Bits and pieces.
The first generation has the direct experience, the physical and emotional scars. But the next generation often gets a sort of curated version, maybe partial, sometimes just the pain without the full context. And the narrator in the album, the Vietnamese woman singing,
right,
she positions herself as this vital go-between, a mediator.
But she's translating the pain.
Precisely. Translating it into lyrics, into music, so that the next generation, her daughter in the narrative, can grasp the history with understanding, not just feel the weight of it blindly. There's that line, "She doesn't know the weight we carry." It's like an admission. I have to make this understandable for her.
That really lays out the stakes.
Yeah.
Okay, so if memory is this heady, this kind of social labor, then the next theme, reconciliation, is where things get really, really interesting. Segment 2 asks point blank, what does it actually take to forgive, to forget? Does the album or the material around it offer any simple answers after 50 years?
Definitely not simple. The sources are really clear on this. The answer is complex. Reconciliation isn't presented as some quick fix, like a diplomatic agreement.
So what is it then?
It's defined as a slow practice, something that takes real effort. It demands, first, naming the injuries clearly, then acknowledging that both sides experienced loss but experienced it differently, and maybe the hardest part, it requires mutual humility.
Mutual humility. I mean, that sounds essential, but how realistic is that when the power dynamics between, say, the U.S. and Vietnam are still pretty uneven.
It is incredibly difficult, and that's why the album seems to argue that real healing doesn't come from grand pronouncements. It comes from these small, incremental, person-to-person actions.
Like the ones you mentioned earlier, shared meals, translating stories.
Exactly. Those human-scale gestures. Sharing food, sharing music, trying to understand each other's narratives. The sources suggest these hold more genuine power than official treaties sometimes. The whole effort is reframed as social labor. It's earned day by day, like a long, hard job you have to keep showing up for.
That's a powerful idea for listeners, I think. It implies we all have a role to play, that reconciliation is something active, something we do.
Yes. And the album doesn't shy away from the difficulty. It's very realistic. It acknowledges that forgiveness has limits.
How so?
Well, the sources point to that recurring image, that refrain of the last helicopter leaving Saigon. It's used as this deeply melancholic symbol.
Suggesting some things just can't be fully reconciled.
Exactly. Some events, some losses can't be undone or perfectly healed. They can only be remembered with integrity. The scars are real, and some are permanent.
So thinking about this segment, what's the takeaway for us as listeners? It seems like it's asking for a balance between hoping for reconciliation, but also being realistic about the pain.
I think so. Demanding empathy from everyone involved, Americans and Vietnamese, while really respecting the complexity of memory, not letting easy answers smooth over the human cost.
Okay, let's move into segment 3, cultural change and modernization. The album uses some really strong images here, old rivers with new bridges. How does this contrast between past and present actually feel on the ground in modern Vietnam, according to the sources?
Well, it's presented as something you feel, not just see, a sensory overload almost.
Like a clash of sensations.
Yeah, exactly. You've got the constant buzz of motorbikes right up against the quiet of an ancient temple. But the temple roof is lit up by bright neon signs now, or you see these huge gleaming glass skyscrapers shooting up right next to areas that were rice paddies not that long ago. Old French colonial buildings might now house, modern shopping malls. It's a real juxtaposition.
That speed of change must create a lot of tension between the memory of what was and the reality of daily life now. But the sources also say that cultural continuity manages to hang on.
It does, yeah. Through these small, everyday things that the songs seem to notice, like market vendors calling out their wares in the same way they always have, or elders praying at dusk, certain smells, certain foods that connect people to the past.
But this rapid change, this modernization, it brings up tough ethical questions too, doesn't it? About who benefits.
Oh, absolutely. That shifts the conversation. Like you said, it stops being just about new buildings and starts being about power. The songs pointedly ask, who's really gaining from all this visible change? Is it mostly foreign investors, big corporations, the tourism industry? And crucially, who's getting pushed out?
Like the vendors you mentioned.
Exactly. Street vendors, maybe small communities, displaced by new city rules designed to make everything look modern. It raises questions about progress erasing the past, or at least specific people's pasts.
So it becomes a conversation about who gets to shape the future of a place, especially when development changes not just the buildings, but the memories attached to them.
Right. And the music really insists on holding on to that local feeling, that specific history, even while placing Vietnam's changes within these huge global economic forces. It's about self-determination, in a way.
Let's look at the diaspora now, segment 4. For the millions who left Vietnam, the refugees and their descendants, the sources say a lot of these tracks feel like letters across oceans. How does that huge distance, both time and geography, shape identity?
Well, the sources talk about diasporic identity as this really complex thing. They call it a layered grammar of belonging.
Layered grammar. What does that mean exactly?
It means feeling rooted in a place you might have never even seen, while also feeling kind of uprooted from the place you actually live. It's this constant balancing act.
Juggling different loyalties, almost.
Kind of. Honoring the memory your family carried, that trauma in the wooden box we talked about, while also trying to fit into a new society. And doing all this while trying to be seen, but maybe without exposing your deepest wounds to everyone.
And language must be absolutely central to this. The album mixes Vietnamese and English lines right into the songs.
Yeah, that bilingualism is key. It's not just code switching. It expresses that hybrid identity, that feeling of having a double consciousness. It shows how the children of the diaspora carry culture forward through what the sources call adaptive inheritance.
Adaptive inheritance.
Things like food, certain habits, maybe lullabies passed down but adapted to the new context. They're not direct memories of the war, but they create these fresh cultural forms, new ways of being Vietnamese outside Vietnam.
That flows perfectly into our last segment, which is really about the album itself, music as a bridge. It's described as cinematic post-rock. Can you unpack that a bit? What does that style do, and how does it help translate such private pain into something others can understand?
That's a great question because, yeah, this isn't your standard pop song structure. Cinematic post-rock. Think long instrumental passages that build atmosphere and mood.
That's texture.
Exactly. Sprawling compositions, often quite atmospheric, that build slowly towards these really powerful emotional peaks, often quite melancholic ones. And the specific instruments they use, like fretless bass or those kind of swirling psychedelic Fender guitar sounds, they're not just playing notes, they're building the emotional architecture of the stories being told.
So it almost forces you, as a listener, to slow down and kind of sit inside the feeling of the memory.
That's a good way to put it. The music itself becomes pedagogical in a way.
It teaches you something.
It teaches you how to listen differently, maybe. It creates a space for testimony, for feeling empathy in a way that a history textbook or a news report rarely can. The instrumentation makes the memory legible through sound. It teaches you how to listen and maybe even how to inhabit another's silence, as one source puts it.
So the album itself, through its form, the shared performance, the bilingual lyrics, these big soundscapes, is suggesting that making art, making music, can be a really vital way to build reconciliation, to open up empathy between people who might otherwise stay divided.
It definitely seems to argue that. By giving shape, sonic shape, to these fragmented and often painful stories, it kind of compels listeners on all sides to grapple with the complexity, the shared humanity, to move beyond just abstract history and into emotional reality.
Wow. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here in this deep dive. We've looked at memory as a living wound, reconciliation as slow, hard work, modernization and its friction, the diaspora's balancing act, and finally, storytelling. Through this specific kind of music, it feels like the real power of this Namunyanam project is that it doesn't offer easy answers after 50 years. It asks both nations, both peoples, to just hold complexity, to mourn honestly.
Exactly. And that's the goal, right? The sources aren't about finding neat solutions. They're about showing possible pathways. Pathways through really listening, through careful translation, whether that's language or experience, and through shared cultural moments like music, to maybe imagine a future together, a future that actually honors everything that was lost.
Okay, so we want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to wrestle with. It comes right from the heart of the album's challenge. The song, What We Know, has this line where the narrator notes that Americans come here taking photos of our scars, but then asks, do they know who we are? So if that's the question, and if modernization is rapidly paving over those historical scars with shiny new buildings, and if people are still in some ways running from the past, what responsibility do we still have across borders 50 years on? What do we really know now? Something to think about.